Hello everyone. Today we're going to make Amo's homeware design, which is a glass decorative wall design. All right. Now, according to this design, we are required to make 2 separate circles, and one circle will be slightly bigger than the other one. I'll explain that later. And from each circle, we only be using half of the circle. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is to start cutting out the circle, and then after cutting the circles, I'll explain how to cut the triangles that is shown in this design. Okay, make sure your space is clear. The tools that you'll need is a circle cutter, your happy snapper, your grouser, and of course your glass cutter, a marker, and a ruler, and your turpentine. First things first, PPE. Always wear your safety goggles or safety glasses to prevent any glass shards flying into your face. Okay, now we need to measure out our radius for our first circle. Our circle diameter is 40 centimeters, 400 millimeters. So on this ruler here, I'm just going to measure that out. Right. I place it more or less in the middle. So I can ensure that I have good space. Enough space to move around. Okay. Now press this little contraption down, and this ensures a suction onto the glass, so a glass circle cutter doesn't move around. Next step is just to apply some terps. Just take your finger, and you're gonna dab just a dot in front of our circle cutter. We always need to lubricate our scoring line before we start applying pressure. Okay, now we just glide our circle around. You should hear that the drives through. If you look a bit closer, you will see that oil circle mark. All right. Now you choose a spot where you want to apply pressure, and you make 1 circle around. Do not apply a double circle, a double scoring line. All right. So holding down, and we press. That little is our sound mark to stop cutting our circle. We just lift that a contraption, and we remove it. Right. Now our next step is to turn this piece of glass around. Take the end of our glass cutter, and we're just going to release some of that tension out of that scoring line. You should see a crack line, and what you can do, you can take your 2 thumbs, apply pressure between the little crack line, and you should see a lather around that scoring line. So you put your 2 thumbs between that scoring line. You should be able to see some movement in that score line. And you should follow that crack line. You apply pressure where that crack line starts. You should hear that loud nip. That's an indication saying that we've made full circle. Right, now we turn our glass around, and we do the same thing, just to release that tension. All right, now we take a glass cutter, apply some terps. Now we're going to cut out our release cuts. We do so by cutting a tangent line from the score line out to the edge of the glass. This helps breaks away the tension surrounding the circle. All right, so we need a ruler. And don't cut directly straight into the circle, rather at an angle so that release can go, in a diagonal direction. If it goes straight, you're more likely to get that crack go straight through the circle. Oil line. We can do it about 4 times at each side. And you're cutting that line just next to the score line, not on it. Right, now we turn our glass around and we break away those release cuts. Take the edge of our glass cutter, we just tap from the edge of a glass into the circumference of the circle. Don't be too worried about the neatness on how you're releasing the cut line, because it's more important to keep the circle safe. All right, that should be circle. There you have it. Circle number 1. All right, so the next step that I'm going to do is half our circle, and we're only going to use 1/2 of each circle. All right, so I'm just going to measure this out first. So this is 40, so I'm looking for a marker, just as a guide. So I know way to cut. So that's our middle line. Now we take our glass cutter, dip it in some turpentine for lubrication. Glide your glass cutter across, then apply pressure. Right. Turn the piece of glass around. Use the end of the glass cutter. Give it a little tap at the edge. At each side. Take your thumb, apply pressure where the cracker started. And we have our 1. We have our 2 halves. All right. Put this aside for a moment. We're bringing our next piece. So we find that middle line. 43. Our glass cutter was already lubricated, so we can just go into applying our glide and then our score. Turn this around. Tap with the edge of the glass cutter on the one side.
A little bit louder.
Tap on the one edge on the one side. Tap on the edge of the glass with the side of the glass cutter. Use your two thumbs. Apply pressure just in front. Separate the two. And there you have it. And you'll only be using 1/2 of each circle. Okay. All right, now we're going to continue to cut out our triangles that is required according to the design. The amount of triangles that we need is 5, which is this shape, and then 2, which will be a bit longer. We'll get to that. All right, so I've measured out my guidelines to cut out the triangles. I've done all the measurements. Oh, I've done all the measurements. Now I can get straight into cutting. Right, so you pick up your glass cutter, turpentine for lubrication, and your ruler. Right, I'm going to cut out the rectangles first, and then I'm going to cut up the little triangle pieces away to make out our triangle. I'm going to start in the middle. Always start off with an even break. You can place your glass cutter just underneath the cut line and just apply pressure. And we can half the rest. Right, now I can cut out according to the guideline. This part stays where it is. This is just a joining, it's just a joining section for the triangles. Okay. Use a happy snapper. Make sure that score line is in the middle of that guideline on the happy snapper, and make sure the screw is facing up. We just break that away. Right, here's our first circle, first triangle. And we just repeat. You can cut 2 lines at a time. Right. They are our triangles. Now I'm going to show you how they will all fit together with the semicircles. Okay guys, now we're going to cut out the last 2 triangles that is required from the design. Alright, so I've already measured out the 2 triangles. I made one big triangle and it's basically halved, and then they will be placed at the end of the semicircle along with the rest of the triangles. Okay, so I'm going to cut this out. I have my glass cutter, my ruler, and my turpentine. I'm just going to start in this half line over here. Have my oil line, and then I apply pressure. I can place my glass cutter at the back of my glass and just press down. I can get an even space, an even cut. Now I can just cut out the rest. I use my happy snapper. There you have it. Now I'm going to show you how everything will be placed together. Alright guys, so now I'm going to show you how to place everything together according to the design. The smaller semicircle is slightly, it's going to be the bottom layer. And then I'm going to have the bigger semicircle placed on top. But first, we need to place our triangles. Our first triangle will be placed in the middle of our semicircle as it is according to the design. And we're just going to place it so we can see more or less how everything will be fused together in the kiln. It's always good to have each triangle touching the other. Okay, now the reason why we have a slightly bigger semicircle, this is because that distance that goes over the bottom layer semicircle is going to hold all that triangles together with the bottom layer semicircle. So the top layer is just a joiner for all the pieces of glass, so they can hold together. All right, now the next step will be polishing the edges in the cold shop using the Linisher polisher. And then afterwards we will be ready to paint or emboss our glass.
Hi everyone, welcome to the cold shop. The cold shop is the area where we do everything cold related with glass, so our polishing and our drilling. Okay, what's very important is that we have spectacles for any sharp glass obstacles or shards coming out at us, so it's very important to put that on. Okay, and what's also very important is our earplugs to protect our ears from the loud noises. This is our linisher machine. And we have, this is our on button, the green one, and then the red one is our off button. At the back here is the lever for the water. What's important is we need to remember that when we polish with glass, that we need water, as the glass needs to be cooled down, otherwise it heats up and it has a very good chance of cracking. I'm going to demonstrate the polishing of this piece, and I'm going to create it into a round circle. All right, so first thing, earplugs in, and switching the machine on, and then when polishing, you always make sure that you are above the sanding belt, okay? And you never apply a lot of pressure because that would just break the belt. One actually just uses the momentum of the sand belt, and you're just holding the glass and moving it. And remember to keep moving the glass piece, otherwise you're going to sand that area flat. What you could see from the video, from what I did as well, you polish one side at an angle and you'll turn it around to another 45-degree angle and you'll polish the other side. And you'll keep continuing on the linisher machine until you get your desired shape that you want for your design. Right, this is the drill press machine in the cold shop area. Right, we switch on again with the green button and then we'll switch it off with the red button at the top. What is also important, again, to wear our clear spectacles for any objects for our eyes, and again, we need to wear earplugs for the noise. I have already marked out, it's always a good idea to mark out the positioning of where your holes will be before you start drilling. I have a 6mm habit diamond drill bit in the machine, and what I'm first going to do is checking my lining up of the hole that I have, well, the marker I have made and the drill. So I'm happy with that. This is our water. Again, we need water because otherwise our glass will get hot and it will crack. So we need water to cool it down. So we're first going to open our water a little bit. Once we have our water on, we're going to switch our machine on at the green button, and the red button is for switching off. There we have our drilled piece of glass. When drilling, always ensure that you're holding the glass down firmly and that you're doing it in slow motion. And this is also to ensure that you do not put too much pressure on the glass, otherwise there's a big chance of it cracking.
Hello everyone, today I'm going to show you how to do a general painting techniques for the designs that is required. The first thing I'm going to show you is a little sample piece of glass. We're going to do all the wet and dry applications on this piece of glass just to show you the general applications. First of all, PPE. It's very important to wear your gloves. We must wear our gloves because the chemicals in the paint are quite poisonous. It contains lead, and if you're pregnant, I would suggest not to work with these paints at all. All right, now you must wear your mask so you can protect yourself from breathing in all these dangerous chemicals when you're doing a dry application or wet application. And it's also very important to work in a well-ventilated area. All right, so now we are going to use a dry application technique, and the tools that we'll need is a sieve. And the colors that we'll use is a yellow brown, and an orange. This is just to create a nice little sunset feel. When working with enamels, it's important to know which temperatures that you are working with. So at the moment I'm using high temp enamels, but the application is exactly the same for low temperature enamels. It's just when it comes to painting with these different temperatures, the texture of the paint differs. So for low temperatures, the paint texture is a lot harsher and a lot crispier. And for high temp enamels, the paint texture becomes a lot softer and a lot smoother. All right. Now for the dry application, we have our sieve and we have a spatula. We use a spatula just to pick up our enamel and to apply it into our sieve, and we're just gonna sieve it onto our glass. All right, it's also important to work on a clean surface or on top of a piece of paper so you don't mess, and all that excess can just fall onto the paper. All right, so we're just going to tap a certain area. And just repeat this process. Just to make sure you get an even coating. The tricky parts are on the edges, because we tend to think that they are all coated, but they're actually not. And we just repeat the same process with the other colors. Come in with our yellow brown. And we apply under our orange. You can overlap the colors slightly, and that's just how we get that that blend of colors that the sunset has. Right, and then we work our way backwards. that is our sunset dry application. You can use the sieving technique in various ways. You can also create a stencil for yourself with different designs, different patterns. You place it on your glass and you just sieve on that stencil. They can just remove the stencil and you have a beautiful dry application of enamels. All right, now this is a sample piece of what we basically just did, and it is a 2-layer piece of glass, and the enamel is fused between those 2 sheets of glass. This sample is for Amo's jewelry piece. It has a sunset design, and that is basically what I just showed you. It's also very important to remember that high temp enamels can be fused between 2 sheets of glass, and it can be applied on the surface of the glass. However, low temp enamels can only be applied on the top layer of glass and not between, because that requires to go to a higher temperature. Okay, now that we've done our dry application, I'm going to show you how to do a wet application. The tools that we'll need is our spatula, so you make sure that's clean. Always have some paper, just to always keep your tools clean. Here are our brushes, our enamel paint, which is a high temperature of black, and our painting medium, and our water. And for certain techniques, it's always nice to have a little needle with a little bit of a spatula, small spatula. Right. Oh, and our sieve again. Okay, the first step is to sieve our enamel paint into our working palette, which is this block of glass over here. It's always nice or important to work in small samples of paint. Then you can always come back and add more. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, good.
So we are sieving our enamel through just to get rid of these little bumps or clumps. And just smooth that out. Then we just create a little hole in the middle. Then we take our painting medium. The painting medium helps the enamel to stick to the glass. If you just use water, the consistency of the paint tends to fade out. And we would like our colors to be solid. So if we use lots of water, you're going to have a very light, watered down texture on your glass. So I just scoop a little bit of medium into our little hole. Then we're just going to grind and smooth that out, mix it through. The consistency that we're looking for is, it's not too runny and it's not too thick. So it's almost like a gouache consistency if you've worked with gouache paint. And to compare it to something, it's almost like medicine, like cough syrup consistency. All right, this painting technique on how to do a wet application is exactly the same for all paints. So that's your high and low temps. All right, now I come in with a brush. Let's use, okay. Let's use this one and a nice big one. All right, I'm just gonna wet our brush in some water. And I'm just going to lift our enamels from the palette. So we're just gonna gather as much as I can onto the brush. And I'm going to now explain the different applications with the wet enamels. So the first one is a dabbing technique where you want a solid texture. So you're basically flooding the paint. And then our next application can be just a stroke. So you get a bit of a paint brush texture. You add more water into your brush. Paint will flow, will fade out a little bit at the end. Now, every time you move back into the paint gets lifted up back into the paintbrush. So it's always important to have one stroke of the application with your paintbrush, otherwise it lifts back if you paint back and forth. But that also depends on the texture and the technique that you are looking for. All right, and then we have another technique I can show you. We have a big brush. Let's give it some water. Just lift that all up. I'm just gonna go straight across, just so that you can see the texture of the paintbrush. When you lift the glass up, you can start to see the texture from the paintbrush. So you have the one application where you're dabbing and letting the paint flood. Then you have the other technique where you can just brush it through. All right, there's another technique that you can use when the paint is dry. You can take a needle and you can scratch back into your paint. You can't see it now, but when it is dry, it leaves the exposure of the glass, so you can create really fine detail into your paintings. Yeah, so you can also use a needle to redefine or define your edges a bit more and to add in a lot of detail. There's a lot of techniques that you can use, just like in normal painting on a canvas. You can apply those same techniques onto glass. So if you want to dab, you may dab. It will end up looking like that. It all depends on you.
Hi everyone, I'm going to discuss with you the application of applying plaster to your kiln shelves and your molds. And the reason we do this is that to make sure that the glass does not stick to the surface we are using in the kiln. I'm going to be showing the wet application, as in this way, when we do a wet application, you do not show any texture, it will create a smooth surface. One can also sieve the powdered plaster onto the surface, and this way you'll pick up more a textured surface if that is what you require. But for this technique, we want a nice smooth surface for all our molds. What we are going to need is our half-mast respirator, because we don't want to breathe plaster in, as it's rather dangerous for our lungs, as it actually solidifies inside the lungs. We also need a goat hair soft brush, and this is what we're going to use to pick up the water plaster mixture that we're going to create or make, and that's what we're going to use to apply onto our surfaces. We also need a bucket with clean water inside. We do not need much, as well as my other bucket that has plaster. All right, please make sure that your kiln shelf has been cleaned before applying your new mold mix onto the surface, as any old plaster on the surface may create devitrification, which is that crystal milky layer that you find on top of glass, which is rather unappealing. Let me explain to you what I'm going to do first before putting my respirator on, otherwise my sound will be too muffled. So I have a basic water, clean water inside my bucket, and I'm going to sieve a little bit of my plaster into the water. It is important to remember we're not making a mold, so we don't need to apply a lot of plaster. It's a watered down mixture of plaster and water. Okay, I can take my respirator off because all the dust is gone, and I'm going to pick up my brush and I'm going to mix that water and the plaster into each other. As you can see, it's a very watered down water and plaster mixture. All right, so this brush allows us to pick a lot of the water up at a time, to be able to make one brush stroke. Do not go back on itself, as it will lift with the previous plaster that you have just applied. When you put your brush back down in your bucket, remember to go all the way to the bottom, because your plaster will tend to settle at the bottom of this mixture. So you can see I'm applying one direction first, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply in the opposite direction afterwards, and the reason for doing this is to create less brush marks on the surface, because glass is able to pick up the texture that one puts on the surface. I normally do this 3 times. And it's a good idea to do this the day before, because you want the kiln shelf to be completely dry before putting your glass on top of this kiln shelf. If there's still moisture on your kiln shelf, it will create steam, and that will also can cause devitrification or bubbles on the surface of your glass. As you can see, I'm going back to put my 3rd layer in. And this will be my last layer for this kiln shelf. When this plaster and water has dried on the kiln shelf, it actually creates a white powdery coat on the surface. All right, I still have enough water in my mix, so I'm going to use that now quickly to also apply it to my molds. There we go. And now what I'm going to do, whilst these are drying, I'm going to ensure that I throw this down, not a drain, into a dustbin. Because remember, plaster does block your drain. And wash your brush immediately, because if your plaster dries on your brush, you won't be able to use this again. Also ensure that your plaster has been sealed, that no water can come into this, because any moisture in the atmosphere will contaminate your plaster, that you also cannot use it. Hi everyone, I'm going to explain to you now the importance of prepping your kiln. One needs to ensure that the kiln is completely clean by vacuuming the inside, as well as going lightly over the elements to ensure that no dust or leftover plaster is sitting on the kiln elements or on the kiln bricks, as this dust can create devitrification again in our glass. So with glass, it's always important to make sure that the area is completely clean before putting our kiln shelf in and our glass in and switching the kiln program on. Oh, also another thing is to make sure that your glass is clean. Before placing it in the kiln, make sure you've washed it and you've dried it and that it's spotless and no dust is on it. I'm now going to vacuum just to show you. Alright, now our kiln has been vacuumed and ready for firing. This is our controller, and on our controller we put in our program, and you'll see we work with a little ramp system. Alright, so I'm going to first take you through the process and explain to you when the certain lights come up. So you'll see the first one at the moment is highlighted, is your first dot. In that dot, you'll see with these two little symbols here, you'll see a temperature and a clock. At the moment, just the clock is highlighted or displaying with a red dot. This means we are talking about time only. So for instance, if we want to delay our kiln firing, what we would do is, say for instance, we wanted to only fire first thing when we come in the morning, we could have put a delay in there for 12 hours so that when we come in the morning, it has started its firing process. Okay, we don't always use this, it's just there if you need it. Then we go again with our arrows and we go into our next program or next section within our program. Now you'll see the next dot is highlighted and you'll see that the time and temperature at the moment as well is shining with the red dots. This is now saying that we are talking about time and temperature. So how many degrees Celsius you want your program to go up according to your time. So if you wanted to go up 250 degrees an hour to 500, as an example, it will take 2 hours. Okay. Then you go up to your next temperature. And you'll see we are just talking about temperature. So here, that was our time to get to our top temperature. So at the moment, you'll see the program is 680, but I'll take you through that step just now. So that is at the moment our temperature. Then we have our next dot that parallel is our, again, time only. So that is talking about a soaking point. So we can allow our glass to stay at a certain temperature. Next process, now we're ramping up again, if you can see by what the picture is showing here. So now again, we are working with time and temperature. So the time we want it to take up with the temperature till we get to our top temperature. Okay, Then we have, again, a delay. So it's the same process repeated. When we are on this process here, often one is able to open up the kiln. Anything above, I would say 680 is fine to open up your kiln to see what's happening, but never allow your kiln to drop lower than 680. This going down is our crash cooling. So this will be able to help us to freeze our glass in that process that we have just seen in the kiln. And then it will go down to a temperature we normally want to hold our glass. And then from this process, we talk about annealing. So we want our glass to go down slowly, therefore that it doesn't crack. Again, we can have a delay of temperature, and then we can go down with our annealing slowly as possible, depending obviously on the thickness of the glass, until normally room temperature or 30 degrees, where we are able to open up the kiln. All right, so this is our high temp enamel firing. We do not need a delay, so we're going to start immediately, and we are going to go up 200 degrees an hour. So I'm pushing my up and down arrow at the top, which allows me to adjust my display at the top. Okay, then I'm going to go up to the top temperature I want for my middle section of my program, and I want that to be 580. Okay, our next section where we're going to allow our glass to soak is at 580. Anything between 60 and 580, our glass is under stress. So it's a point where we want our glass to go up slowly or go down slowly. So always keep that in mind. So now we're at our midpoint of 580, and I'm going to now put a soaking point of 10 minutes in. Our glass is not that thick, so we don't need to allow it to soak for that long. So that why we put a soak in is that to make sure that our glass, the entire, not just the top surface, but the entire, from the bottom to the top, has evenly heated up in between. Then we're going to actually go up full. Our glass has no tension in it. Because our glass has no tension in it, we don't have to worry about taking it up slowly from 580. Remember, above 580, we can work at a much faster ramp if there's no tension. So what full stands for, basically, it's basically telling me that I want my glass to ramp up as fast as possible, or sometimes it may mean as fast down as possible to cool to a certain point. So I want my glass to go as fast as possible up to my top temperature, where I'm working with 815, which is my, according to my test pieces, my desired top temperature for my high temp enamel paints. I'm then going to allow it to soak for 10 minutes. 10 minutes is sufficient for this firing, and then I need to now crash cool. So now I'm not physically going to crash cool, which one can also do. You can assist the kiln by opening up the lid and crash cooling the kiln down to 680 if you're going to manually do it. If you're allowing your kiln to do it, you need to bring it down full. So again, now I'm making my kiln go as fast as possible down, and I'm going to rather anneal it a bit lower to 580, because this is now where my glass starts becoming under tension again. And then I'm going to hold there for about 15 minutes. And why only 15 minutes is because my glass is not that thick. If my glass was thicker, then I would hold it for longer, because it is important that the glass is evenly heated before annealing it down. You don't want the middle part of the glass, which normally takes longer to get to the desired temperature you have. So it's important to anneal and hold it there before bringing it down. Now I'm going to bring my glass down. Remember, again, the thicker the glass is, the slower this process will be. I'm only going to bring it down 100 degrees an hour to 30 degrees. And in this process, it will slowly cool down and my glass won't then be under tension anymore. You're allowed to open the kiln, obviously depending on your outer environment. But in summer in South Africa, you may open it up already at 60 degrees. Obviously in winter, it will be a much lower temperature, but I always just put in 30 degrees just to be safe. Hi everyone, we now have our high temp enamel paint in the kiln, which we're going to fire to 815 degrees Celsius. They're both Amel's works. The one is her sun design for the homeware and the other one is her jewelry piece. The jewelry piece, we are first going to fire the high temp enamel paint onto the glass to make sure that when we put the copper wire in between, that it does not move the paint at all. And the high temp for the sunrise for Amel, we need to make sure that the paint is well secured properly onto the glass before placing and fusing all the pieces together. My program is in the controller ready. I'm going to put my program on and I'm going to close it with just a little bit opening until we get to 100 degrees Celsius. This is to ensure that if any moisture is in our kiln, that it can escape. Hi everyone, I'm now going to explain to you the process. When we fire a high temp enamel paint, we normally fire it without the top layer, especially we want to fuse it between the two layers. And this is to ensure that there's no bubbles or anything trapped. Now I'm going to explain the process of fusing that top layer of glass on top of your fired enamel paint. We are not using a delay because we want our glass to start firing, our kiln to start firing immediately. And here we are going to take our glass up 200 degrees an hour. I'm taking it up not too fast because I'm fusing two pieces of glass together, so I want to ensure that it goes slowly here. And then taking it to my temperature point where my glass is the most fragile. I'm then taking it up to 580 because from 580 to room temperature, my glass is fragile. So I need to work with this process very slowly. I am then going to hold that temperature for 10 minutes. Actually, no, I'm going to hold it up for 15 minutes. Reason being because I've got two layers of glass and I want to ensure that my bottom painted layer is also at 580 before taking it up to its top temperature. I'm then going to take the glass up 250 degrees an hour up to my top temperature of 820 degrees. And at 820 degrees, my glass will become soft and the edges will fuse to become one on the surface. So it will not be seen as two layers of glass anymore. I'm going to hold it there for 15 minutes to ensure that all my edges are soft and melted and that there is no air bubbles captured in between the glass. I then need to now crash cool the process to be able to capture that point and make sure we capture that glass in that moment. I'm then going to bring it down as fast as possible because I'm doing this via the kiln crash cooling, and I'm going to take it down to 580, and this is again where our glass becomes fragile. So we need to make sure from this process, from this temperature, from 580, we are bringing the glass down slowly again. Well, first I'm going to hold it, for 15 minutes to ensure that the entire piece of glass that we fused is all 580. And then from that, I am going to bring it down 100 degrees an hour, and this process is called annealing until 30 degrees or room temperature where we can open the kiln. We're now going to do the fuse of the glass pieces together of Amel's homeware and her jewelry pieces. Inside the kiln, you'll be able to see how we've layered the two half circles on top of each other with the triangles underneath. And basically what's going to happen, all these different objects that you saw previously from the high temp enamel firing will fuse together to become one piece. We're now going to close the kiln, leaving a little section open. And I'm going to switch the kiln on. And once it reaches 100 degrees Celsius, we'll close the lid. We leave it open so we can allow any moisture that's in the kiln to escape.